What would you do if your husband pushed you into shark-infested waters while you were 8 months pregnant? Then called the police claiming you jumped. Margot Caldwell faced exactly that. Her husband had manufactured 6 months of evidence proving she was mentally unstable. He had doctors, lawyers, and video footage all supporting his story. She had nothing but the truth, and in a system where evidence beats testimony, the truth wasn't enough. Or was it? This story has more twists than you can imagine, and I promise the ending will shock you. Smash that like button, subscribe, and let's dive in together. Literally, the Coast Guard footage was grainy, but the audio was crystal clear. "Ma'am, can you hear me, ma'am? Stay with us." Margot Caldwell's voice came through in broken gasps. "He pushed me. Brett pushed me off the boat." The paramedic's hand appeared in frame, checking her pulse. "Your husband called us 2 hours ago. He said you fell. Said he searched but couldn't find you." Margot's eyes snapped open, water still streaming from her hair. 8 months pregnant, hypothermic, covered in jellyfish stings. And she understood immediately. Brett had gotten to them first. He'd already told his story. "No," she whispered. "No, that's not what happened." But the paramedic was already wrapping her in thermal blankets, calling out vitals to the helicopter crew. Nobody was listening. They'd already decided what this was. A tragedy, an accident, a pregnant woman who fell overboard while her devoted husband searched desperately for her. The truth was so much worse. 48 hours earlier, Margot had believed she was going on an anniversary cruise, Catalina Island. Just her and Brett, celebrating 10 years of marriage before the baby came. She'd packed the overnight bag herself, chosen the white sundress Brett loved, even brought the prenatal vitamins her doctor insisted she take religiously. She hadn't packed her phone charger. Brett said he'd bring it. She hadn't brought her wallet. Brett said they wouldn't need it. She hadn't told anyone where they were going. Brett said it was a surprise. Romantic. Just for them. Every decision, she realized now, had been his. Every choice had narrowed her options. Every suggestion had isolated her further. The yacht was beautiful. 60 feet of gleaming white fiberglass, anchored in a private marina where Brett kept it docked. Margot had only been on it twice before. Brett claimed he was too busy with work to use it much. But now she wondered how many times he'd taken Lacey Whitmore out on it. How many times had his executive assistant sprawled across the deck furniture? Drinking champagne meant for his wife Margot had found the text messages 3 months ago. Lacey's name didn't appear in Brett's phone under her real name. She was saved as warehouse supplier, which should have been Margot's first clue. Her husband ran a hedge fund. What warehouse supplies did he need? The messages were explicit, detailed, 6 months of an affair, conducted in hotel rooms during business trips and in Brett's downtown office after Margot went to bed each night. When she confronted him, Brett had been calm, too calm. "You're being paranoid," he'd said, pouring himself scotch like they were discussing stock portfolios. "Lacey works for me. Those messages are taken out of context." "Context, Brett. She sent you a photo of her in lingerie. A joke. Office humor. You wouldn't understand workplace dynamics." That should have been her breaking point. Instead, Margot had done what she'd always done. She'd believed him. Or rather, she'd wanted to believe him so desperately that she'd convinced herself the alternative was impossible. She'd gone to therapy. Her therapist, Dr. Hayes, had been sympathetic but cautious. "Prenatal anxiety is common. Margot, the hormones can make you feel paranoid. Have you considered that you might be catastrophizing?" Margot had nodded, feeling foolish. Maybe she was overreacting. Maybe pregnancy had made her irrational. What she didn't know was that Brett had been feeding Dr. Hayes information for months, carefully worded emails expressing concern about Margot's increasing paranoia. Forwarded text messages where Margot asked him repeatedly where he'd been, who he was with. Each message painted her as obsessive, controlling, mentally unstable. He'd built the case slowly. A paper trail of documentation proving his wife was losing her grip on reality. Now, standing on the deck of the yacht at dawn, Margot understood she'd walked directly into his trap. Brett stood near the helm, coffee in hand, looking every bit the successful 40-something executive, dark hair graying at the temples. expensive watch catching the sunrise, designer sunglasses hiding his eyes. "Beautiful morning," he said. His voice was pleasant, friendly. The voice of a man who hadn't been planning his wife's murder for months. Margot's hand went to her stomach. The baby kicked. Hard. As if she knew. As if she could sense what was coming. "Brett," Margot started, "I need to tell you something." He turned, and for just a moment, his expression was blank, completely empty. Not angry, not sorry, not guilty, just nothing. Then he smiled, and it was worse than the blankness. "Let me guess," Brett said softly. "You want to talk about the post-nuptial agreement again?" The post-nup. He'd presented it to her 6 weeks ago, claiming his lawyers insisted on it for estate planning purposes before the baby arrived. Sign over power of attorney. Given full access to her $12 million trust fund. Agree to mediation instead of court proceedings if they ever divorced. Margot had refused to sign it. Now she realized that refusal had been her death sentence. "You've been recording me," Margot said. It wasn't a question. She'd found the device 3 days ago, hidden in the bedroom lamp, a small voice-activated recorder, the kind lawyers use for depositions. She'd left it in place, not wanting to tip him off, but standing on the deck with nowhere to run, no point in pretending anymore. Brett's smile widened. For 6 months, actually, every conversation, every phone call, every middle-of-the-night anxiety spiral when you couldn't sleep. The baby kicked again. Margot forced herself to breathe. "Dr. Hayes will testify that you've been experiencing prenatal psychosis," Brett continued, setting down his coffee cup with deliberate care. "The recordings support that diagnosis. You've been paranoid, accusatory, emotionally unstable. You've accused me of having an affair with no evidence. I saw the messages." "Which messages? I've never seen any inappropriate messages on my phone. Have you, Lacey?" Margot hadn't noticed Lacey Whitmore emerge from below deck. The 26-year-old wore yacht-appropriate attire, white shorts and a navy-striped shirt, her blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail. She looked like she belonged in a clothing catalog. Young, beautiful, completely at ease. "I've never sent Brett anything inappropriate," Lacey said. Her voice was cheerful, helpful. I think Margot might have misunderstood some work correspondence. This was rehearsed. They'd practiced this. Margot could see it in the way Lacey positioned herself, angled so the rising sun backlit her hair, made her look innocent and concerned. "Why is she here?" Margot demanded. "You said this cruise was just us." "I needed someone to document the trip," Brett said. "For social media. You know how important it is to maintain our image." Social media, their public-facing accounts showed the perfect couple. The successful hedge fund manager and his beautiful wife, expecting their first child. Brett posted regularly, carefully curated photos of their life together. Margot had stopped posting months ago, couldn't stomach the performance anymore. "You're going to kill me," Margot said quietly. Lacey laughed, a practiced sound of disbelief. "Oh my God, Brett, see what I mean? This is exactly what you were worried about." Brett moved closer. Not threatening, not yet. Just a concerned husband approaching his unstable wife. "Margot, sweetheart, you're having an episode. You need to sit down. The pregnancy hormones are making you irrational. Stay away from me. The champagne I gave you last night had a mild sedative," Brett continued, his voice calm, clinical. "Just to help you relax. Dr. Hayes prescribed it. She's very concerned about your mental state." Margot's mind reeled. The champagne, boy, she'd only had one glass, but she'd felt strange afterward. Fuzzy, disconnected. She'd assumed it was pregnancy fatigue. "You drugged me." "I gave you doctor-prescribed medication," Brett corrected. "There's a difference. Everything I've done has been documented, approved, legal. When they find you, when they recover your body, there will be a clear paper trail. A mentally unstable woman who refused treatment, who became increasingly paranoid, who had a history of anxiety and depression." "I don't have a history of depression." "According to your medical records, you do. Dr. Hayes has been very thorough in her documentation." Understanding crashed over Margot like the waves against the boat's hull. This wasn't sudden. This wasn't passionate. Brett had been planning this for months, maybe years. Every therapy session, every recorded conversation, every carefully documented concern had been building toward this moment. Why? Her voice broke on the word. Brett pulled out her phone from his pocket. Her phone, the one she'd left charging in the cabin. You should have signed the post-it up. Margot, you're worth more dead than divorced. $3 million in life insurance, plus your trust fund doubles if you die before the baby is born. $27 million total. And with Lacey's testimony about your mental state, with Dr. Hayes's records, with 6 months of recordings proving you were delusional, paranoid, unstable, nobody will question it. A tragic accident, a pregnant woman who leaned too far over the railing, got dizzy, fell. He wasn't lying. Margot could see it in his eyes. This was real. This was happening. The baby, she whispered. Brett, the baby is yours. Something flickered in his expression. Not guilt, annoyance. I know, but I also know you'd never give me full custody. You'd fight me in court, drag out a divorce, try to take half of everything I've built. This way is cleaner. Cleaner. He was talking about murdering his pregnant wife like it was a business decision. Because to Brett, that's exactly what it was. A cost-benefit analysis. A strategic move. The most efficient way to access her money while eliminating the liability of a wife who had started asking too many questions. Margot looked at Lacey, who was holding up a phone, camera pointed directly at them. Recording. Creating the evidence they'd need to sell the narrative. Please, boy, Margot tried one last time. Please don't do this. Brett's hands settled on her shoulders. Firm. Final. You should have signed the papers, he said, and pushed. The water was 58 degrees Fahrenheit. Margot knew this because she'd checked the weather report before they left, had wondered if it would be too cold to swim. Now she knew it was. The shock of impact drove the air from her lungs. Cold slammed into her like a physical force, seizing her muscles, stopping her heart for one terrible second before it stuttered back to life. She went under, the weight of her pregnant belly pulling her down, the sundress tangling around her legs. Swim. She had to swim, had to surface. The baby. God, the baby. Margot kicked hard, fought through the fabric, broke the surface gasping. Salt water burned her throat. She coughed, choked, tried to orient herself. The yacht was 30 feet away. Brett stood at the railing, watching. Lacey beside him, phone still recording. Help, Margot screamed. Help me. The yacht's engines rumbled to life. For one desperate second, Margot thought he was coming back for her, that he'd changed his mind, that some shred of humanity had survived. The boat turned, not toward her, away. No, Margot thrashed in the water, trying to swim after them. Brett, please. The yacht paused, circled back. Hope surged through Margot's chest. Brett appeared at the railing, holding something. A life jacket. Orange and bright, impossible to miss. Grab it, baby, he called out. His voice carried across the water. Concerned, desperate. The perfect imitation of a frightened husband. Save yourself, please. He threw it. The life jacket arced through the air, landed 10 feet away. Margot swam for it, every stroke agony, the cold leaching strength from her limbs. She reached it, grabbed the strap. Too heavy. The realization hit as she tried to pull it on. The life jacket sank, dragging her down with it. Weighted. Brett had put weights in the life jacket. Margot let go, watched it disappear into the dark water below, surfaced again, coughing. The yacht's engines roared. This time it didn't circle back. It just left. Margot treaded water, watching the white hull grow smaller, smaller. Gone. She was alone. 8 months pregnant, in 58-degree water, 5 miles from shore. Nobody knew she was here. Brett had her phone. He'd already called the Coast Guard with his version of events. By now, search helicopters were probably looking in the wrong direction, following the coordinates Brett had given them. Hypothermia would set in within minutes. She'd lose feeling in her extremities first. Then confusion. Then unconsciousness. The baby would die first, her body shutting down non-essential functions to preserve her own life. Then Margot would slip under the surface and simply not come back up. Brett had planned it perfectly. The first cramp hit her abdomen. Not a contraction, a warning. The baby was in distress. Responding to Margot's dropping core temperature, Margot forced herself to think. She couldn't swim to shore. Not with the cold sapping her strength. She couldn't stay afloat much longer. She needed help, needed rescue. But the Coast Guard was searching the wrong area. A boat engine, distant, but getting closer. Margot tried to scream, but her throat was raw. She waved her arms, bright white sundress visible against the dark water. Please see me, please. The fishing boat appeared around the point, early morning sun glinting off its weathered hull. A man stood at the helm, scanning the water. Margot waved harder. Here, I'm here. He turned, saw her. Change course. The last thing Margot remembered before hypothermia took her was the fisherman's weathered face, shocked and concerned, as he pulled her aboard. Jesus Christ, lady. What the hell happened? My husband, Margot whispered. My husband tried to kill me. Then everything went black. Margot woke to white walls and beeping monitors. Hospital. The baby. Her hand flew to her stomach. She's okay. A nurse appeared beside the bed, checking IV line. Heart rate strong. You got lucky. Mrs. Caldwell, hypothermia at 8 months pregnant. Most women would have lost the baby. But the baby was alive. Still moving. Still fighting. Where's my husband? Margot asked. The nurse's expression shifted, became careful. He's on his way. The police called him about an hour ago. Police, right. Of course the police would be involved. A pregnant woman found floating in the ocean. That demanded an investigation. Detective Ellis Grant arrived before Brett did. Mid-40s, graying hair, tired eyes that had seen too much. He pulled up a chair beside Margot's bed, notepad in hand, then, Mrs. Caldwell, I need you to tell me what happened this morning. Margot told him everything, the anniversary cruise, Brett's plan, the recordings, the push, the weighted life jacket. She spoke quickly, urgently, knowing Brett would arrive any moment with his version of events. Detective Grant listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he pulled out a tablet, turned it toward her. Your husband filed a report 3 hours ago, Grant said quietly, before we even found you. The video on the screen showed the yacht's deck from multiple angles. Security cameras. Margot realized. Brett had installed security cameras. The footage was clear, high definition, time-stamped. It showed Margot standing at the railing, Brett approaching with coffee, a conversation Margot couldn't hear. Then Margot leaning forward, Brett reaching for her, grabbing her arm, Margot pulling away, losing balance, going over the side. Brett's scream was audible even without sound. He ran to the railing, shouting her name, grabbed the life jacket, threw it. Then he was on the radio. Voice panicked, calling the Coast Guard. Latitude 33.4 north, longitude 118.5 west. My wife fell overboard. She's 8 months pregnant. Please, you have to find her. The wrong coordinates. Deliberately wrong. But on camera. Brett looked like a man watching his wife drown, helpless to save her. That's not what happened, Margot said. Grant showed her more footage. Lacey's phone, recovered from the boat. Video of Margot refusing the life jacket, swimming away from it. Brett's anguished voice, Margot, please, grab it. Baby, please. He weighted it, Margot insisted. That's why it sank. That's why I let go. Mrs. Caldwell. Grant's voice was gentle but firm. The life jacket is Coast Guard regulation. We recovered it from the boat. It's perfectly normal. No weights, no tampering. Impossible. Margot had felt the weight, watched it sink. Unless Brett had 2 life jackets, one weighted, one normal. The normal one still on the boat for investigators to find. Of course he'd thought of that. There's more, Grant said, and Margot knew from his tone it was bad. We spoke to Dr. Nora Hayes, your therapist. She provided your medical records with your husband's consent. Margot, you've been experiencing severe prenatal anxiety, paranoid ideation. Dr. Hayes has been worried about you for months. Brett fed her that information. He recorded our conversations. Made me sound crazy. The recordings purport Dr. Hayes's diagnosis. We've listened to them. You accused your husband of having an affair multiple times, despite no evidence. You claimed he was plotting against you. You refused to take prescribed medication for anxiety. Margot wanted to scream. Every word was true, but the context made it sound like delusion instead of reality. Where's the affair evidence? Grant asked. The text messages you mentioned. On Brett's phone, saved under a fake name. Warehouse supplier. Grant's expression told her everything. Mrs. Caldwell, we examined your husband's phone. There is no contact listed as warehouse supplier. There are no inappropriate messages at all, because Brett had deleted them, or claimed his phone was stolen, or fabricated records showing someone hacked his iCloud. He'd had 3 hours to clean up evidence while Margot floated in the ocean. What about Lacey Whitmore? She was there. She recorded the whole thing. Miss Whitmore gave a statement. She said you seemed agitated this morning, that you'd been talking about the water calling to you, that you leaned over the railing despite both of them trying to stop you. The water calling to her. Jesus, they'd really committed to the suicide narrative. The door opened, Brett walked in, and Margot's whole body went rigid. He looked perfect, exhausted but relieved. Designer clothes rumpled from worry, eyes red from crying. He rushed to her bedside, reached for her hand. Margot jerked away. Brett's face crumpled. Margot, thank God. I thought I'd lost you. I thought I'd lost both of you. Get away from me. The doctors said you're experiencing confusion. It's normal after hypothermia, after trauma. But baby, then I'm here. I'm not leaving you. Detective Grant stood. Mr. Caldwell, your wife has made some serious accusations. I know. Brett's voice broke. She's been paranoid for months. Dr. Hayes warned me this might happen. The pregnancy hormones combined with her anxiety disorder. It's created a break from reality. But we're going to get her help, whatever she needs. He was good, so good. Margot could see Grant softening, see the detective's skepticism toward her growing. Mrs. Caldwell, Grant said carefully, I believe you believe what you're saying, but the evidence doesn't support your version of events. What it does support is that you're a woman in crisis who needs help. I'm not crazy. Nobody's saying you're crazy, but you've been through a trauma. The hypothermia, the pregnancy stress, your existing anxiety condition, it's all compounded. I'm recommending a 72-hour psychiatric hold for your safety and the baby's. No. A psychiatric hold meant Brett had won. It meant more documentation of her mental instability, more proof for whatever he planned next. I want a lawyer, Margot said. Brett squeezed her hand. She tried to pull away, but his grip tightened. Just enough to hurt, just enough to remind her how powerless she was. Of course, sweetheart. Whatever you need, we'll get through this together. His smile was warm, loving, everything a concerned husband should be, and Margot understood she was completely, utterly trapped. Harper Reeves arrived at the hospital 6 hours later, laptop bag over her shoulder, divorce lawyer mode fully activated. She'd been Margot's college roommate, maid of honor at her wedding, godmother designate for the baby. She also specialized in high-conflict divorces, the kind where husbands hid assets and wives needed protection. Tell me everything, Harper said, pulling a chair close to Margot's bed. And I mean everything. Margot did. The whole story, start to finish. Harper didn't interrupt, just took notes on her tablet, expression growing darker with each detail. When Margot finished, Harper was quiet for a long moment. We're going to destroy him, she finally said. But we need evidence. Real, admissible evidence. Your word against his isn't enough. Not with the medical records he's manufactured. I don't have evidence. He thought of everything. Maybe not everything. Harper pulled out her laptop. Do you still have cloud backup enabled on your phone? Margot's heart jumped. Yes, automatic backup to my personal account, which Brett doesn't have access to. No, I set it up before we were married. Used my maiden name email. Harper's smile was sharp. Then let's see what we can find. 20 minutes later, they had it. Text messages between Brett and Lacey, recovered from the cloud backup, 6 months of messages, explicit and damning. The insurance policy paid off finally, $3 million. When, this morning, I called them from the boat, said Margot went overboard, looked devastated. They processed it immediately. What about the trust fund? Doubles if she dies before the baby's born. Another $24 million. We're set for life. Brett, I can't believe we actually did it. We didn't do anything. She fell. Remember, she's been mentally unstable for months. Everyone will believe it. Margot's hands shook, reading the messages. Proof. Finally, proof. This is premeditation, Harper said. This is conspiracy to commit murder. We take this to Detective Grant. Brett gets arrested. They went to Grant immediately. He was at his desk at the Santa Monica police station, working late. He looked up when they arrived. Expression wary. Mrs. Caldwell? Ms. Reeves? What can I do for you? Harper laid her laptop on his desk. Messages displayed. Read these, then tell us Brett Caldwell didn't try to murder his wife. Grant read. His expression shifted from skeptical to focused to grim. When he finished, he looked up. Where did you get these? With cloud backup? Margot's personal account. Brett didn't know about it. Grant was already on his phone, calling someone. I need a warrant. Brett Caldwell's phone records, financial records, everything. We have evidence of premeditated attempted murder. Hope surged through Margot's chest. This was it. This was justice. Then Grant's expression changed. What do you mean the phone was reported stolen? The voice on the other end spoke. Grant listened, jaw tightening. When, a pause. 3 days before the cruise, I see. He hung up, looked at Margot and Harper. Brett reported his phone stolen 72 hours before the yacht trip. Grant said quietly. Filed a police report. Got a replacement. Everything documented. He's claiming someone must have hacked his cloud account, planted those messages to frame him. That's insane, Harper said. Nobody plants 6 months of messages. His lawyers are already arguing the metadata has been altered, that these texts are fabricated evidence created by someone trying to destroy his reputation. And given your psychiatric hold, Mrs. Caldwell, given the documented history of paranoid accusations against your husband, a defense attorney will shred this in court. Margot felt the floor drop out. You don't believe him. It doesn't matter what I believe. It matters what I can prove. And right now, with Brett's phone reported stolen, with technical experts questioning the message authenticity, I can't arrest him on this alone, Hano. What about Lacey? Margot demanded. Interview her? She was there. She'll crack. We tried. Miss Whitmore has lawyered up. She's not talking without immunity, and the DA won't offer immunity without more evidence. They were going in circles. Every piece of evidence had a counter-explanation. Every accusation had documentation disproving it. Brett had built the perfect frame, and Margot was trapped inside it. There has to be something, Harper said. Grant rubbed his face, looking older than his 41 years. I'm not giving up, but I need you to understand what you're up against. Brett Caldwell is a wealthy man with expensive lawyers and 6 months of documentation painting his wife as mentally unstable. Even if we find evidence, even if we build a case, he has the resources to fight it for years. So what do I do? Margot asked. Just accept that he tried to kill me and got away with it. No, you stay alive, you protect that baby, and you let me keep investigating. Grant's expression was grim. But Mrs. Caldwell, you need to be prepared for the possibility that justice takes time, sometimes a very long time. Outside the police station, sitting in Harper's car, Margot finally broke down. All the fear and rage and helplessness she'd been holding back came pouring out. Harper let her cry, then handed her tissues. We're not done, Harper said. Grant's right that the criminal case is complicated. But there's another angle. Civil. Your trust fund. We prove Brett forged your signature on financial documents. We can freeze his access, maybe even get him arrested for fraud. It wasn't murder charges, but it was something. Let's do it, Margot said. Harper's smile was fierce. Now you're thinking like a fighter. 3 weeks later, Margot sat in a conference room at Harper's law firm, 8.5 months pregnant now, preparing for the emergency injunction hearing. They had evidence of Brett's financial fraud, forged signatures on trust fund documents, unauthorized transfers, $3.7 million in debt taken out in Margot's name. Wade Thornton, Brett's business partner for 15 years, had agreed to testify. He'd been quietly documenting Brett's embezzlement from their hedge fund, waiting for the right moment to act. That moment had arrived. He's been stealing from the firm for over a year, Wade told them during prep. Small amounts, careful timing, always just ahead of audits. I didn't want to believe it at first. Brett and I built this company together, but the numbers don't lie. Why didn't you report him? Harper asked. Wade looked uncomfortable. Because reporting him means admitting I didn't notice for over a year. My reputation gets destroyed too. But after what he did to you, Margot, I can't stay silent. Some lines you don't cross. The hearing was scheduled for 2 p.m. Margot wore a navy maternity dress, practical flats, no jewelry except her wedding ring. Harper had coached her on every detail. Looked professional but sympathetic. Pregnant but competent. Victimized but strong. Judge Margaret Walsh presided. A woman in her 60s with steel gray hair and a reputation for no-nonsense rulings. She reviewed the evidence in silence, then looked up. Mr. Caldwell, you forged your wife's signature on multiple financial documents. Do you dispute this? Brett's lawyer, a sharp-eyed man named Richard Vance, stood. Your Honor, my client signed those documents with his wife's verbal authorization. Mrs. Caldwell was experiencing severe pregnancy-related anxiety and asked her husband to handle financial matters. I never authorized anything, Margot said. You were also placed on a psychiatric hold 3 weeks ago, Vance continued. Your mental state at the time of these alleged unauthorized signatures is questionable at best. The signatures are forged, Harper countered. We have handwriting analysis proving it. Brett Caldwell has stolen from his wife, his business partner, and filed fraudulent insurance claims. He's a thief and a liar. Alleged thief, Vance corrected. And may I remind the court that Mrs. Caldwell has a documented history of making false accusations against my client. She claimed he tried to murder her, a claim thoroughly investigated and dismissed by Santa Monica PD. Not dismissed, Harper shot back. Still under investigation. Judge Walsh held up a hand. I've heard enough. Mr. Thornton, you're prepared to testify about financial irregularities at Caldwell Capital Management. Wade stood. Yes, Your Honor. I have documentation of $830,000 in unauthorized transfers, all traceable to Brett Caldwell's personal accounts. That's a lie, Brett said, speaking for the first time. His voice was calm, controlled. Wade has been trying to push me out of the company for months. This is a power play. Nothing more. A power play, Wade repeated. Brett, we've been partners for 15 years. I'm risking my entire career by being there. Why would I lie? Because you want control of the firm. You've always resented that clients prefer working with me. It was almost convincing. Brett looked hurt, betrayed by a friend's false accusations. If Margot hadn't known the truth, she might have believed him. Judge Walsh studied both men, then looked at the financial records. I'm ordering a forensic audit of Caldwell Capital Management. In the meantime, all of Brett Caldwell's accounts are frozen pending investigation. Caldwell, you'll have access to your salary. Nothing more. Victory. Margot felt it wash over her, sweet and intoxicating. Brett's face went white. Your Honor, Vance protested. My client has bills, obligations. Your client has a salary of $500,000 per year. He'll manage. Walsh turned to Margot. Mrs. Caldwell, your trust fund is hereby secured. No further access without court approval. This hearing is adjourned. Outside the courthouse, Margot let herself breathe for the first time in weeks. We won, she whispered. Harper hugged her carefully, mindful of the pregnant belly. First battle, not the war, but yes, we won. Wade approached, looking relieved and nervous. Margot, I'm sorry I didn't act sooner. I should have said something months ago. You're saying something now. That's what matters. Her phone rang. Detective Grant. Mrs. Caldwell, I need you to come to the station. Now. Something in his voice made Margot's blood run cold. What happened? It's Lacey Whitmore. She's dead. Lacey Whitmore was found in Brett's beach house in Malibu, hanging from a bedroom beam. The suicide note was typed, printed, left on the dresser. I can't live with what I did. I pushed Margot. Brett tried to stop me. He tried to save her. I couldn't live with the guilt anymore. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Detective Grant showed Margot the note in his office, his expression grim. This doesn't make sense. Margot said, Brett pushed me, not Lacey. The note confesses to everything. Pushing you, plotting to collect the insurance money, manipulating Brett into the scheme. She paints herself as the mastermind and your husband as an innocent victim. That's insane. You can't believe this. Grant sighed. What I believe doesn't matter. What matters is that the DA just dropped the investigation into Brett. Lacey's confession clears him of wrongdoing. He's the victim now, the man whose mistress went rogue and tried to murder his wife. Margot's world tilted. Brett killed her. Don't you see, he killed her to close the loop, to make sure she couldn't testify. The medical examiner ruled it suicide. There's no evidence of foul play. The security system at the beach house shows Lacey arriving alone yesterday evening. No one else entered or left. She hanged herself. Margot. Then Brett was already inside, or the security footage was edited, or a young woman overwhelmed with guilt took her own life. Grant's voice was gentle but firm. I know you want Brett to be guilty of everything, but sometimes the obvious answer is the right one. Harper was already on her phone, researching, pulling up articles. This is too convenient. The timing. Right after the hearing where Brett's assets got frozen right after Wade agreed to testify. Wade Thornton called me an hour ago. Grant said he's recanting his testimony. Says he made a mistake in the records. The transfers were legitimate. The room spun. Margot gripped the edge of Grant's desk. Brett got to him, Harper said. Threatened him or paid him off. Mr. Thornton says no one threatened him. He simply reviewed his evidence more carefully and realized his error. Everything was falling apart. Every victory reversed. Every ally scared off or eliminated. What about the forged signatures? Margot demanded. The fraudulent loans. Without Wade's testimony about the embezzlement, the signature case gets weaker. Vance is arguing you gave verbal authorization and simply don't remember due to pregnancy-related memory issues. It's your reward against Brett's, and you have a psychiatric hold on your record. So he wins. Brett murders his mistress, frames her for attempted murder, and walks away free. Grant looked tired, defeated. I'm not closing the investigation completely. But without Lacey's testimony, without Wade's cooperation, without physical evidence placing Brett at the scene of her death, I have nothing. The DA won't prosecute. Margot's water broke in Detective Grant's office. One moment she was standing, arguing, desperate. The next, warm fluid flooded down her legs, and a contraction hit so hard she doubled over. Hospital, Harper said, already grabbing her keys. Now! They didn't make it in time. Margot went into labor in the parking lot of the police station, Harper screaming for an ambulance. Detective Grant helping ease her into the back seat of his car because the ambulance was still 10 minutes out. I can't do this, Margot gasped between contractions. Harper, I can't. He's going to win. He's going to get away with everything. You can, Harper said fiercely. You have to. This baby needs you. I need you. You don't get to give up. But giving up felt so easy. So much easier than fighting a man who'd murdered his mistress and made it look like suicide. A man who'd bribed or terrified witnesses into silence. A man who controlled every narrative, manipulated every system, stayed always one step ahead. Emma Rose Caldwell was born at 3:47 a.m. in the emergency room. 5 weeks premature, 4 pounds, 3 ounces, tiny but healthy, screaming at the top of her lungs, furious at being evicted early. The nurse placed her on Margot's chest, kin to skin, and Margot felt something shift inside her. Not healing, not peace, just determination. She couldn't give up, not with this tiny person depending on her. She's perfect, Harper whispered, tears streaming. She was dark hair, Brett's eyes, Margot's chin, a whole person, complete and furious and alive. Brett arrived an hour later. He walked into the hospital room like he belonged there, like he had every right to meet his daughter. Get out, Margot said. Margot, please. She's my daughter, too. I have rights. You tried to kill us both. You have no rights. I would never hurt Emma. Whatever you think I did, whatever paranoid delusions you're experiencing, that baby is innocent. She deserves to know her father. A nurse appeared in the doorway. Mr. Caldwell, Mrs. Caldwell has requested you leave. I'm going to have to ask you to respect her wishes. Brett looked at Emma, something unreadable crossing his face. Love, regret, or just calculation. Seeing another chess piece he could use against Margot. I'll be back, he said, with court orders if necessary. She's my daughter. Margot, you can't keep her from me. After he left, Margot held Emma close and tried not to think about custody battles, about how Brett would use this baby to maintain control, about how even killing his mistress and framing Margot for mental instability might not be enough. He'd keep coming, keep manipulating, keep winning, unless someone stopped him. The question was who? Paige Caldwell appeared at Margot's hospital room 3 days after Emma was born. Brett's mother, a woman Margot had met exactly 4 times in 10 years of marriage. Paige lived in Connecticut. Old money, older values. The kind of woman who still wore pearls to breakfast. Mrs. Caldwell, Margot said warily, I wasn't expecting you. May I come in? Emma was sleeping in her bassinet, tiny chest rising and falling. The NICU had released her yesterday, declared her healthy enough for regular monitoring. Paige closed the door behind her, moved to the window. She looked at Emma for a long moment. She has his father's eyes, Paige said quietly. My husband's eyes. Robert. Brett's father passed away 5 years ago. Yes, heart attack. They said sudden, unexpected. Paige's voice was carefully neutral. Robert was 49 years old, healthy, no history of heart disease. And yet, Margot's instincts prickled. What are you saying? I'm saying my husband died very suddenly after telling me he planned to divorce me. After telling me he'd met someone else, a younger woman he worked with. Paige turned to face Margot. Robert died, and Brett inherited everything. His life insurance, his business holdings, his seat on 3 corporate boards. $23 million transferred to my son before Robert's body was even cold. The room felt smaller suddenly. You think Brett killed his own father? I think my son is very good at making deaths look natural or self-inflicted. I think he's been doing it longer than anyone realizes. Paige pulled out her phone, but I need to show you something. The video on her phone showed the yacht's deck, but not the edited version Detective Grant had showed Margot. This was raw footage, uncut, from a backup cloud system Paige had access to as part owner of the yacht. It showed Brett pushing Margot, not pulling her back, not trying to save her, pushing her deliberately, forcefully, while Lacey filmed from the side. It showed Brett throwing the weighted life jacket, heard his voice clearly. Should have signed the post-nup. Margot, you're worth more dead. It showed them high-fiving after Margot went under. Lacey laughing, Brett grinning. This is the real footage, Paige said. Before Brett edited it, he didn't know the yacht has a secondary backup system. I installed it years ago, after Robert died. Call it paranoia. Call it insurance. Either way, Brett never knew it existed. Margot couldn't breathe. Why didn't you come forward sooner? Lacey is dead. If you'd shown this to police, I would have been next. Paige's voice was flat. I'm not brave. Margot, I'm a 72-year-old woman who spent 40 years married to a man I suspected of terrible things but never had proof. When Robert died, I grieved, but I also felt relieved. And then I watched my son become exactly like his father, and I stayed silent because I was afraid. What changed, Emma? Paige looked at the sleeping baby. My granddaughter. I won't let her grow up like Brett did. Won't let her think this is normal. Won't stay silent while she learns that people are disposable and money is everything. She pressed the phone into Margot's hands. Take this to Detective Grant. Let him arrest my son. Send him to prison where he belongs. He'll know you gave it to me. I know, I'm prepared for that. Paige, if Brett killed his father, if he killed Lacey, he'll come after you too. The older woman smiled, sad and knowing. Probably, but I'm 72. I've lived my life. Emma's just starting hers. If the choice is between my safety and her future, there's no choice at all. 20 minutes later, Detective Grant stared at the video on Paige's phone, expression shifting from skeptical to focused to grim. "This is unedited," he asked Paige. "Completely?" The backup system timestamps everything. Stores footage encrypted. Brett never knew it existed. "I designed it that way after my husband died." Grant was already calling the DA. "I need an arrest warrant for Brett Caldwell. Attempted murder, conspiracy, insurance fraud. I have video evidence. Unedited, authenticated. Damning." He paused, listening. "No, this isn't the same footage from before. This is what actually happened." Another pause. "How soon can you get Judge Walsh to sign off?" Grant checked his watch. "I'll bring Caldwell in within the hour." After he left, Margot looked at Paige. "Thank you. I know what this cost you." "It cost me nothing. I should have acted years ago. When Robert died, I should have pushed for an investigation. When Brett married you, I should have warned you. I've spent decades staying silent, and that silence nearly got you killed." Paige touched Emma's tiny hand. "No more silence. No more protecting monsters just because they're family." Brett was arrested at his downtown office, surrounded by colleagues and clients. The video was all over the news within hours. Clear footage of Brett Caldwell pushing his pregnant wife off a yacht, laughing about her death, planning how to spend her money. Public opinion shifted overnight. The devoted husband became a monster. The tragic accident became premeditated murder. Every news outlet ran the story. Hedge fund manager caught on video, attempting to murder pregnant wife. Wade Thornton found his courage again, gave a press conference detailing Brett's embezzlement. Other victims came forward. Clients Brett had defrauded, business partners he'd stolen from. A pattern of financial crime stretching back 15 years. Lacey Whitmore's death was reclassified as a homicide investigation. The suicide looked a lot more suspicious with video evidence of Brett's capacity for murder. The DA offered Brett a deal. Plead guilty to attempted murder. Get 25 years with possibility of parole. Refuse the deal. Go to trial. Risk life without parole. Brett took the deal. Even he knew the video was unbeatable. The sentencing hearing happened 4 months after Emma was born. Margot sat in the front row of the courtroom. Harper beside her. Emma in a carrier strapped to Margot's chest. 4 months old now. Healthy, thriving, completely unaware of the drama happening around her. Brett stood before Judge Walsh in an orange jumpsuit, hands cuffed. He looked thinner, grayer. Prison didn't suit him. "Mr. Caldwell," Walsh said, "you have pleaded guilty to attempted murder, conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud, and embezzlement. Do you have anything to say before I pass sentence?" Brett looked at Margot. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Brett said, "I'm sorry for all of it. I don't expect forgiveness. I just want you to know I'm sorry." The apology felt empty, performative. One last attempt to look human before disappearing behind bars for decades. Judge Walsh clearly agreed. "Mr. Caldwell, I've reviewed your case extensively. The premeditation, the manipulation, the utter lack of remorse until the moment you were caught. You attempted to murder your pregnant wife and unborn child for money, when your accomplice became a liability. You murdered her as well. You've shown a pattern of violence and fraud spanning over a decade." She leaned forward. "I'm sentencing you to 25 years in federal prison without possibility of parole. You'll serve this sentence at FCI Terminal Island. After your release, should you live that long, you'll be on supervised parole for life." Brett didn't react, just stood there, blank-faced, as marshals led him away. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Margot gave a brief statement, Harper's hand on her shoulder for support. "I'm grateful for the justice system, for Detective Grant's thorough investigation, for everyone who helped bring the truth to light. But mostly, I'm grateful to still be here, to hold my daughter, to have a future." A reporter called out, "Will you write a book about this?" Margot looked at Emma, sleeping peacefully despite the chaos. "Maybe someday, when I'm ready. Right now, I'm just focused on being a mother." That was mostly true. What Margot didn't say was that she still had nightmares, that she jumped at unexpected noises, that therapy happened twice a week and would probably continue for years, that some days She was fine. And other days, the weight of what almost happened crushed her. Justice had been served. Brett was in prison. She was safe. But healing was slower than justice. Recovery didn't happen in a courtroom. It happened in quiet moments, in therapy sessions, in the everyday work of rebuilding a life. Harper drove her home to the small apartment they'd rented together after Margot sold the house. She couldn't live there anymore. Couldn't walk through rooms where Brett had planned her murder. The apartment was modest but safe. 2 bedrooms, decent kitchen, security system that probably wasn't necessary, but made Margot feel better. Harper had moved in 3 months ago, taking the second bedroom, helping with Emma during the nights when Margot couldn't sleep. "You okay?" Harper asked, setting Emma's carrier on the counter. "I don't know. I thought I'd feel different after the sentencing, like closure, but I just feel tired." "That's normal. Closure isn't a moment. It's a process." Emma woke, started crying. Margot picked her up, felt the small, warm weight against her chest. This was real. This was solid. Whatever else happened, Emma was here, healthy, alive. "We need to talk about Paige," Harper said carefully. Margot tensed. Paige Caldwell had been receiving death threats since the trial. Brett's supporters, people who still believed the whole thing was a setup, targeted her online. She'd hired security, moved to an undisclosed location. "She wants to see Emma." "I know. She's called 4 times. Margot, she saved your life. Without that video, Brett walks free." She also raised him. She knew what he was capable of and stayed silent for years. "How do I trust that?" Harper didn't have an answer. Neither did Margot's therapist. Trust wasn't simple after betrayal this complete. Everyone became suspect. Everyone potentially dangerous. "Think about it," Harper said. "No pressure. But Emma deserves to know her grandmother. And Paige deserves a chance to do better. Maybe people could change, could atone for past silence. Maybe forgiveness was possible even when trust wasn't." Margot didn't know. She just knew she was exhausted. Physically, emotionally, spiritually drained. "I need to sleep," she said. "Go. I've got Emma." Harper took the baby, started warming a bottle. Margot retreated to her bedroom, closed the door, collapsed on the bed. Sleep didn't come easy. It never did anymore. Every time she closed her eyes, she was back in the water. Cold, alone, drowning. But eventually, exhaustion won. And this time, the dreams were different at the end. This time, she dreamed of Emma's first steps, first words, first day of school, a future that almost didn't exist but did. A future Brett couldn't touch. That was something. That was enough. For now, Dinbone, Emma was 18 months old when Margot finally agreed to meet Paige. The older woman had been patient, never pushing, just sending occasional cards and photos to remind Margot she was there if needed. They met at a park, neutral territory, public enough to feel safe. Paige arrived early, sat on a bench feeding ducks, looking smaller somehow. Frailer? 73 years old and carrying the weight of enabling a monster for decades. Margot pushed Emma in the stroller, approached slowly. Emma babbled at the ducks, pointing with chubby fingers. "Duck," Margot said. "Can you say duck?" "Duh," Emma pronounced, delighted with herself. Paige smiled. "She's beautiful. She looks like you. She has Brett's eyes. She has Robert's eyes, my husband's. Before Brett inherited them." Paige's voice was careful. "May I hold her eyes from?" Margot hesitated, then unbuckled Emma from the stroller. The toddler went willingly to Paige, curious but not afraid. "Hi, sweetheart," Paige whispered. "I'm your Grandma Paige." "Gamma," Emma attempted. Something in Margot's chest loosened. Not forgiveness, not yet, but maybe the beginning of something like it. They sat together, watching Emma play. After a while, Paige spoke. "I think about Lacey sometimes. Wonder if I'd come forward sooner, whether she'd still be alive." "You didn't kill her. Brett did. But my silence enabled him. For years, I knew what he was capable of and said nothing." Margot didn't argue. It was true. "My therapist says people do the best they can with the tools they have." Margot said, "For 40 years, your tools were denial and survival. Then Emma gave you different tools. You made a different choice. You're very generous. No, I'm just tired of being angry. Anger kept me alive when I needed it. But Emma deserves better than growing up around rage. They stayed at the park for an hour. Emma played, chasing ducks, falling in grass, laughing, normal toddler joy, completely unaware of the legacy she'd been born into. Before they left, Paige pulled out an envelope. Brett's appeals were denied. He'll serve the full 25 years, but I want you to have this. Inside was a letter, handwritten on lined paper, Brett's handwriting. He wrote to me asking me to give this to you. Paige said, "You don't have to read it. You can burn it." But I promised him I'd deliver it. Margot took the envelope. "Did you read it?" "No, that's between you and him." At home, Harper watched Emma while Margot sat alone in her bedroom with Brett's letter. She stared at the envelope for 20 minutes before opening it. The letter was short. "Margot, I won't insult you with more apologies. You deserve better than empty words. I just want you to know I understand what I did, the magnitude of it. I tried to murder you. I tried to murder our daughter. I killed Lacey to cover my tracks. These are facts I have to live with every day. In prison, I've had a lot of time to think about my father, about what he taught me, about the man I became. I don't blame him. I made my own choices. But I understand now how easy it is to see people as obstacles instead of humans. How money becomes more important than life. How the end justifies any means. I was wrong. About all of it. Emma is 19 months old now. I've missed her entire life. I'll miss the next 23 years too. By the time I'm released, she'll be 24, an adult. I'll have missed everything. That's justice. That's what I deserve. I hope you're healing. I hope Emma never knows what I tried to do. I hope you find happiness. You were always stronger than I gave you credit for. I underestimated you. That was my biggest mistake. Brett." Margot read it twice. Then she folded it carefully, put it back in the envelope, and filed it away in a drawer. Maybe someday she'd show it to Emma. Maybe not. That was a decision for the future. Harper knocked on the door. "Emma's asking for you, Margot found her daughter in the living room, playing with blocks, building and destroying with equal enthusiasm. "Mama," Emma squealed, running over with open arms. Margot picked her up, felt the solid weight, the warmth, the trust. This tiny person believed Margot could keep her safe. And maybe, despite everything, she could. "I love you," Margot whispered. "Love you," Emma echoed. That night, after Emma was asleep, Harper brought wine and they sat on the small balcony overlooking the city. "So," Harper said, "how was it seeing Paige?" "Strange, but okay. I think we'll see her again." "Good. Emma needs family." "She has family. She has us." Margot sipped her wine. "Actually, I wanted to talk to you about that, about making it official. Would you be Emma's godmother?" Harper's eyes welled. "Really? If something happens to me, I want her with someone who loves her, someone I trust completely. That's you? Nothing's going to happen to you, Biden?" "Probably not, but after everything, I'm not taking chances." Margot smiled. "Besides, you're already doing the job. Might as well get the title." They toasted to godmotherhood, to survival, to the messy, complicated work of building a life after trauma. Later, alone in bed, Margot thought about Brett's letter, about his claim to understand, to regret, to accept consequences. She didn't know if it was true, didn't know if people like Brett could genuinely change or just learn to perform remorse convincingly. It didn't matter. His feelings weren't her responsibility anymore. What mattered was Emma, was healing, was the future. Margot pulled up her laptop, opened a new document. For months, people had asked if she'd write about what happened. Publishers had reached out, offered advances, promised bestseller lists. She'd refused every time, not ready to revisit the trauma. But maybe now she was ready. Not for money or fame, for other women. The ones trapped in marriages they couldn't escape. The ones being gaslit, controlled, systematically destroyed by men who claimed to love them. If Margot's story could help even one woman recognize the warning signs, get out before it was too late, the telling would be worth it. She titled the document 58 Degrees and started typing. The water was 58 degrees Fahrenheit when I went in. I know this because I checked the weather report before we left, had wondered if it would be too cold to swim. Now I knew. It was. The words came slowly at first, then faster. 3 hours later, she had 15 pages. The beginning of something. The start of claiming her story instead of letting others tell it. Emma cried from the nursery. Margot saved the document, went to her daughter. Emma stood in her crib, arms outstretched, face crumpled. Bad dream, Margot asked, picking her up. Emma buried her face in Margot's shoulder, nodded. Me too, sometimes. But we're safe now. I promise. She rocked Emma until the toddler's breathing evened out, until she fell back asleep. Then Margot stood there in the dark nursery, holding her daughter, and felt something shift. Not healing, not yet, but the beginning of it. The first tentative steps toward a life defined by more than survival. Brett was in prison. Lacey was dead. Paige was trying to atone. And Margot was here, alive, holding her daughter, writing her story. That was victory. Not perfect, not clean, but real. And real was enough. Margot placed Emma back in the crib, watched her sleep for a moment. Then she went back to her laptop, to the words waiting to be written, to the story that demanded telling. She had survived. Now she would thrive. One word, one day, one breath at a time.